you so much, Pooja, for joining Urban Asian today. And we
My
just really
pleasure.
excited, yeah, we're really excited to kind of see your journey and kind of hear more about your career. So my first question for you is, how did your career begin? And then when did you kind of decide that you also wanted to do directorial and production work along with being an actor?
Well, that's such a great question. I have always been an artist. I've been an actor and a writer. Not actually acting, I stumbled into. I was a dancer and a writer my whole entire life. I actually wanted to do what you're doing. I wanted to be a journalist, and I would say that basically, my beginnings as an artist was studying Indian classical dance, Bharatanatyam. And so this is where my heart and passion was. I wanted to do that professionally. And I just got to a place where really I probably needed to have gone to India to really work at my full potential. But as the universe would have it, I had been acting in high school. And then I ended up I went to college, had a really huge theater program. So I stumbled into acting there, getting more serious about it. And then when I finished college, I was working as a journalist and working as an actor. And it kind of just got to a place where I had to focus. So acting became my primary focus. And then in terms of directing and producing, I think I just got to a place where with acting, I felt I wasn't working at my full potential. I went to ACT in San Francisco where I studied classical theater, and I was given the gift and opportunity to work at my full potential. Playing the title character in Antigone and doing Shakespeare. And so when I got out of school, it was a little bit of a rude awakening because at school we were all treated like the stars of our own show, given these. And when I say stars, what I mean is given meaty roles to really sink your teeth in and act dream roles for an actor. And when I got out of school, it was a little bit of a rude awakening because I had been, working on Shakespeare and then or the classics and then coming out and having like one line. And there's nothing wrong with that. There are no small parts. And I would go in treating every, opportunity like it was an Oscar winning project. I still do that. I strongly believe if you want to win an Oscar, treat everything like it's Oscar worthy. So so I did that. I always went into things with a um, positive attitude and gratitude to collaborate and everything. And I felt that there's more that I could do, that my potential was not being fully realized. And so I went to Sundance one year and I started seeing other people's work that they had created. And I just felt like there were so many projects that inspired me so much that I felt I wanted to create myself. And there were also a lot of projects that were just okay. And then I just kind of thought, well, if they're creating that, I'm sure I could do something. And I gave myself permission really to create and not feel like it had to be this perfect thing and just start and tell my own stories. And I also think that I started to realize that it's all the same. What you do as a journalist, what I'm doing as an actor, what I'm doing as a director, or someone else is doing as a producer, um, even behind the camera. Uh, all of these things are ultimately storytelling, and so is dance. So I started understanding that everything that I had done that I thought was different was actually the same, and at its core essence was telling great stories, and that's what I'm most passionate about. So this is kind of how the writing, creating, and directing kind of came into play, connected with my own acting work. And now where I feel like is, I think that I've grown in the sense that I love stories so much, and I see the power of a great narrative to uplift humanity and be of service to humanity, that I love acting and I'm more interested in the story than even me being in the story now. Like if I'm in the story, great. And if I'm not, that's okay too. What is the biggest priority to me is the story that's being told.
That is very kind of like an inspiring story because it also leads to a few questions that I kind of already had for you
Okay.
regarding also just like South Asian representation in the industry. So when you first started, you're mentioning kind of having not maybe, any role that's small or large, but they were maybe more out of the main character scope of screenplay. So did you find that there were limiting roles for South Asian female characters specifically when you first started out in the industry? And is that maybe one of the reasons why you wanted to move towards more acting and producing and directing as a whole, instead of, kind of relying on other people to create those roles for you?
I don't know if I thought they were limiting it. I just thought that we weren't seen. When I look at back on if there were a lack of roles, it's because I think that we just weren't seen. Our story wasn't being, our communities were invisible in terms of TV and film and theater. And I don't really blame anybody for that because who can tell our story? The only people who can tell our story is us. And so it's been a very empowering experience to um, to explore that. And also, in order to tell our stories, we need to know our stories. So I think we need to know ourselves to tell our stories. And I think that opportunity and responsibility falls on our own community. Nobody can do that for us. And I actually think that, at least in my experience, our creative partners, so to speak, right? Like if we want to take our story to the public theater or Netflix or wherever, have been incredibly generous and interested and curious about our communities. And so this is a beautiful time of communities, of bridges being created between communities. And in and through the stories, we're actually arriving at more of a place of empathy, understanding, compassion for one another, and unity. So that's kind of how I see it. I don't, I just that thought more that we weren't on screen. We didn't really see ourselves on screen. And so, um, yeah, I think that's kind of more what I experienced. And I think more and more I'm seeing our stories told. And yet, to have the true authenticity and depth that they deserve, we do need people that have those backgrounds. So this is why it's so exciting to talk to you, and it's so exciting to have women be behind the camera, because in order to really have that lens and the authenticity that stories deserve and that audiences appreciate, they require having the people with those experiences behind the camera. I'm not saying that we can't have collaborators. Like right now, I'm working on a feature, and my EP, my co-executive producer, is the lead role of the project is, it's a female driven project, and the lead is for basically an Indian woman in her 60s. And my co-executive producer, he is not Indian, or he is not Indian, and yet he's done a phenomenal job developing the story with me. So I'm not saying that it has to be all South Asian to tell a South Asian story. In fact, that's never been the case with anything I've created. I've always had really diverse teams, fortunately. Um, I just do think that when we're telling stories of particular communities, integrating collaborators that are of those communities will always benefit and elevate the story, in my experience, what I've observed.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. I think that it is important to have the person representing that community, but it is also important to have a diverse team to kind of show that representation in
Yeah.
a like a proper manner, I feel like, because otherwise it can be very one-sided sometimes. And I know that a lot of people have had that complaint, with the growing representation within the industry. Um,
Oh, really? Okay,
yeah.
I was not aware of that. Yeah, it's interesting because to me, that's always been where I've started to be able to examine more how my stories have been could be universal. I think we're all reaching towards stories that are universal and that reflect our common humanity, and that is actually good for business because you want to appeal to as many people as possible. I don't really approach my storytelling that way, but I'm kind of thinking more in terms of executives that are making decisions and things like that. And for me, what my experience has been, a great example of this is my one woman show, Great Dive. Rafael Casal was our dramaturg on this project. And Raphael, I love him so much. We couldn't come from more different backgrounds. He's from Oakland. He's half Cuban. He comes from a hip hop community. Am from Chicago. I'm this, Indian American girl from Chicago, and very different backgrounds. And we started collaborating on this show. And he just brought so much to this story that I'm so grateful to him. And it was when I started to see that my story could relate to him, that he could identify with it. That's when I realized that we were getting to what is universal in the story. So I do think diverse teams contribute to that for sure.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that leads me to my next question. Because I really wanted to talk about your own production, which is called Geeta's Guide to Moving On. So you're
Mhm.
talking a lot about storytelling and the impact of telling stories in today's day and age. So my first question for you regarding your own story is, what was your kind of inspiration for this production?
Yeah, I have to say there have been many inspirations, and I really feel Issa Rae has been a huge inspiration to me. I started getting into creating web series stories when Issa Rae was doing Awkward Black Girl, and my collaborators Jamila Webb and Megan Prawl, we were huge fans of her show, um, and so basically I would say what happened is we were briefly mentored by her, and we're in a writer creator group of people of color. That's another thing I really recommend for the people that are listening that are creators is find your tribe, find your community, and find other people that are interested in doing what you're doing, that you want to support and that can support you, because we're really all in this together. And I want to see everybody win. And this is not a sport. Creating is not a sport. TV, film, theater production is not a sport that you could do alone. It is a collaborative process. So whether we were conscious of it or not, we basically started doing that, supporting one another. We had a writer creator group where people would meet and say, hey, we need this location. Oh, I got that. Go call that person. And this is how people started getting their work done. So I would say her journey was incredibly impactful in the journey of Geeta's Guide to Moving On, because it was the first time I saw a woman creator and a creator of color tell her own story. And just so many people related to Awkward Black Girl. Like I relate so much to Awkward Black Girl, and I'm not even of that community. So I think, and I know Suchata Day was involved with that as well, and I know she would say the same as being a part of the ensemble cast. So I think that that was one of the single most influential parts to making Geeta's Guide, because I really thought, well, I'm an awkward brown girl, and how would this story translate for that community? And then I think the second thing was drawing from personal experience. I I think that I had actually, it's funny because I know you're calling me from your home, and I actually had moved home for summer into my parents' home, into my childhood bedroom. And this resulted, wackiness ensued, so much comedy from my summer living with my parents. And I drew on those experiences. And I would not say that the show is, it's not nonfiction. It is not directly from my life. There's so many things that happen in the show that it's fiction, it's creative writing. But there were a lot of things that were inspired by my personal experience, particularly with recovering from a breakup, my dating journey. So, you know, Geeta's a little bit of a hot mess. So I feel a little, vulnerable saying that. I don't feel like I'm a hot mess anymore, but I've had hot mess moments, and that comes up in the show.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have the hot mess journey here and there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I like to
And I
call it
think
hot
that
mess
what's
moments
that?
in our journey. I like to call it hot mess moments in our journey. Sometimes in the journey of life, we have some messy moments here and there. Um,
Yeah.
but I liked what you said about how um, it's not necessarily nonfiction, but it's more, I would almost categorize it as like a slice of life film. Because something that, when I read about the web series and, your production, something to me that was really interesting is that it seemed to be integrating South Asian values into a slice of life film, which is something that we don't necessarily see still in the English film industry. I know that we see it a lot in the Indian film industry, where you obviously have these slice of life films, but they're set in India, and so that was really interesting to me to kind of see that here. Was that also again from personal experience? Did you feel like you wanted to draw from things that you saw happening around you in your day-to-day life into the kind of screenplay that you were either narrating, writing, or creating together?
Yeah, that is such a great question. I was not conscious of that when I created it at all. And I'm starting to become a little bit more aware that we are, you and me and the South Asian community, particularly the, I'm going to call them kids that grew up here, right? In the United States or Canada, North America, in the West. We have become, whether we asked for this or not, a bridge between East and West. And whether we're conscious of it or not, we have been formed by values of these two communities, these two countries. I don't want to say countries because South Asia has so many communities and countries and cultures, subcultures. But if I were to categorize all of them, I would say the East. And the East looks at the world differently than the West. And I just think that that came up in the web series in ways that I'm a little bit more aware of now. For example, I have a line where I think I say something about how there's so many atheists on dating apps. And looking back on it, I didn't really, I wasn't conscious of this, but now I am. I realize like South Asia, like the East is so spiritual, particularly India is so spiritual. And I don't think when I made that web series, I was aware of what a spiritual person I am. I don't think I was, and yet it came through in the writing in little lines like that. They're comedic, and you can have light lines of comedy and dialogue that reflect larger ideas and philosophies. And I think this is what I really gravitate to in writing. Writing is just such an amazing platform, or I should say, way to spread great ideas. And I think that's a thing I wasn't really getting to experience as much in acting. I am now, now if I have having more opportunity to choose what I work on. But in the beginning, going back to your original question, I think that was something that even if I didn't know, I always saw stories as a way to connect with great ideas that deserve being amplified. So, yeah, things like that line, or we are here to help others. I remember saying that, I think, in episode 6, or writing that and then saying it as an actor. And that really is derived greatly from my guru, Dada J.P. Vaswani, who has really taught me that we're here to be of service to humanity. And seva, the concept of seva, which means service in English, is a huge part of our culture, South Asian culture. So these ideas are values that, yeah, if I look back on it, really come from Eastern Eastern values. And I think that now I'm like looking back on it, I'm more aware that this is kind of how some of these ideas came through, and I don't think I was conscious of it. And I think, that's part of the creative process. So much of it is subconscious.
Yeah, I think that the subconscious screenwriting is really interesting. So, a follow-up question on that. So, when you were kind of writing the screenplay and then going into production, post-production, were there any hurdles that you and your team kind of had to face, whether that be something wasn't possible to kind of do during production, or something that you had written in your screenplay didn't really translate on screen? Do you have any kind of moment like that that you would want to share also to people who are thinking about going into screenplay or production or directing, and maybe can take a little bit of advice from you?
Yeah, and the other thing I want to say is that this is a huge opportunity for us, like to be of these two identities. It's an opportunity to um, nurture understanding between communities. I think that's something we're going to see more and more. Nurture understanding between East and West. So I feel like we're very privileged to be able to be this bridge. Um, in terms of obstacles, I would say the biggest obstacles were that come, you know, top of mind is my mom was in the first three episodes and then she quit on me. And and a lot and people really loved her. And people really love the mom that plays the mom in the rest of the episodes, Anita. So Anita Chandwani. So basically, that was an obstacle because I had done three episodes and then now I had to recast it. Same thing happened with Danielle Pinnock. She played Akua in the first three episodes, and then she ended up moving to LA, and now she's on Ghosts on CBS. So I'm so happy for her that she had this journey. And I was, you know, figuring out how do I recast this, or how do we, more than recasting, we can recast, but how do we acknowledge this in the web series? And what I kind of think is that the problem is always the solution. I learned this from Dallas Travers, this amazing coach, and it's always stayed with me, that the problem is the solution. Actually, sorry, reverse that. The solution is the problem, both, right? So we think, let me rephrase this. If we think the problem is that someone needs to be recast, then acknowledging that the solution is the problem. So what I did was, in the web series, we just said, I think something like, I put up in the front title card a new post-it that's each episode had a post-it, which was the theme of the episode, I think. I can't remember, but at least in that one, the fourth episode, we put a post-it in the title card and said, new Akua, new mom. And then the third one said, moving on. And I feel like that kind of encapsulate the fact, which was the theme of the show, that in life we have losses, and the show is called Geeta's Guide to Moving On. How do you move on from loss? These were two losses that as a producer we experienced, and we kind of, in the solution of it, just embraced that, acknowledged it to the audience, and then, you know, had the opportunity to define the theme of the show and kind of reemphasize the theme of the show. So that was probably one thing. But honestly, I thought it was one of the most fun things I've ever done. The whole project had such a like family labor of love vibe, and I still continue to be in touch with so many people that were part of the web series. Um, I'm just a person that always will transmute a problem or a loss into an opportunity and a win. That's how my mind works. That's the if I could give one piece of advice to the creators out here, it is there. I don't think that there are any problems. There are just opportunities. Every problem can be translated, transmuted into something that's actually better for your project. And this is what I see again and again. I have a friend named Amber who says, the better it gets, the better it gets. And I say that probably several times a week. Every time something happens where it doesn't work out, we perceive it that it doesn't work out. But the universe, our higher power, has something better planned for us. So if we could just easily let those things, those losses, like slide off our back, we'll be able to be open and available to the blessing that's on the other side of it. So I think that is what I experienced with that project. That's what I just continue to experience again and again. And it makes it easier to navigate our perceived problems. And gratitude. Gratitude, if we can just stand in gratitude again and again, you will never feel that something is a problem. You will actually just appreciate what you do have and then make do with what you do have. That's what we have to do as creators. It's like being in the kitchen and saying, what is in my fridge, you know? And when I cook, there's always one thing missing in my fridge that I need for the recipe. You know, there's always one thing I'm like, oh, I need that. I should just run down. And what do? We just say, okay, you know what? I don't have that. I'm going to still make the recipe. And I'm either going to find a substitute or a replacement, or I'm just going to leave that little ingredient out, and it's still going to be the best meal ever. And it always works out. You know, you have to really adopt that everything is always working out for you, and then it will. It does. It always does. So that's kind of my approach. It's a mindset thing.
That's a really helpful mindset. I think also, I know how we were talking about being kind of in our 20s, young South Asian women growing up and trying to see the world. And that's a lot of the basis of your storytelling and kind of telling those stories. And I think that that advice is perfect. Even for someone like me who's kind of navigating, you know, 20s, early 20s, going into everything, I think looking at, like you were saying, every solution as a problem and every problem as a solution, and kind of taking it step by step is really, really
I
helpful.
hope that made sense.
No, it did.
Yeah.
Completely. I
What
think,
I mean is that we say, oh, this is the problem. Um, this is the problem. I want to reach out to this person, but it's been so long since I've reached out to them. Well, then just acknowledging that. It's like, I know it's been so long that we've talked. I want to just say hello. It's like acknowledging that the problem is there, kind of makes it disappear, and or at least gives you a way to navigate it a little bit better. But yeah, so I think that I think reframing mindset. There was one other thing I was going to say, but it'll come back to me.
yeah, I think kind of going off of that, reframing what you were just saying in terms of acknowledging that there is a problem can kind of start the way for a solution. And that's kind of what I took away from your advice because I also think that was kind of the road towards more representation within the film industry, within the television industry, and kind of acknowledging that there is a lack of South Asian representation. And then creators like yourself are moving that forward with creating your own representation and storytelling and screenplay to kind of move our diversity and inclusion forward. And hopefully we'll get to see more of these stories in the future. And that kind of leaves me to my last question. Can you tell us a little bit about more of some of the projects that you're moving forward in the future with? I know you're doing some more production and directorial work, so can you just share a little bit of that with us as well?
Yeah, and this is what I would escape my mind that but came back to me. When we talk about problems, if you see a problem, it's going to be a problem. It's almost like deleting that word and replacing it with opportunity. And so I think the other thing around, creating and navigating these perceived problems is if you want to see darkness, you're going to see darkness. If you want to see light, you're going to see light. So really, we get to be empowered and just choose, what do we want to see? And I just will always choose to see the love and light in every situation. And then that becomes my experience. So, in terms of what I'm working on now, I would say that I have several scripts that I've written that are ready to be produced, and I would love to find homes for those projects. A lot of them are TV projects that are really things that require more institutional support. And this is where I feel like a lot of us creators are at, because a TV series is not something I could self-produce or produce independently. It requires a studio and a partner like a broadcast cable streaming partner. So those projects are I'm looking for homes for, to be able to take it to those institutions and and produce them in the way that they deserve and need. And one of those projects is called Welcome to Shakti. Welcome to Shakti, I would say, is a half-hour dramedy. It's basically, I feel like, my Insecure. Insecure, like I said, Anissa Rae has been hugely influential in my creator journey. And Welcome to Shakti is basically that. I would say it's a TV adaptation of my web series. But that may not be the most accurate thing, because I think actually the web series was very half-hour sitcom-y, and Welcome to Shakti is a lot more Insecure, Masters of None, Rami vibes, more Fleabag. So it's a little bit tonally different. And that project was also on this list called WeForShe. It was listed as one of the top 20 unproduced female-driven pilots in Hollywood. I'm really, really excited to make that one day. And independently, I'm working on a feature film called Lakshmi In Love. And our executive producer is Neil Landau. He did Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. And we're going to be shooting the project in Chicago next summer. So it will definitely be a Bollywood Hollywood collaboration. The female leads will be from Bollywood, and the male lead will be from Hollywood. So we're putting that together. And I'm just very, very excited. The lead role is going to be an Indian woman in her 60s who stumbles into love for the first time at 59 years old. And I've just really I love the women in our community so much, particularly our moms, our aunties, and I feel like this is a love letter to them. And so yeah, I'm really excited to showcase a woman of that age and of that background and tell her story because I just haven't seen it up until this point. I feel like we're starting to see more and more stories around our own experiences as Indian Americans growing up here, and I'm very, very curious about the experience of actually the people that immigrated here and what was it like to come here and what is it like to live here now, and exploring things through that lens.
That's really exciting. I especially really like the concept behind Lakshmi in Love. I think that we see all of these, rom-coms or love stories of women in their 20s or even in high school, a lot of those like teenage romances or in their 30s. But I think in the South Asian community specifically, we tend not to focus on love stories beyond the age of, the end of your 30s because we really believe that, oh, at that point you should be settled. You should have already gotten married. You should have already found the love of your life. And I think that that is amazing that at 59, she's falling in love for the first time. I think that that's a story that we haven't seen and can also be extremely relatable to a lot of the older women in our community who might not necessarily feel like they're missing out on that representation just yet. But when they see that, that'll be something where it'll kind of click for them. And I'm really excited to see that. That's amazing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was definitely inspired by it's so true. Thank you for shedding light on that. It's so true. Our community really is so anchored in the institution of marriage. I often joke that South Asians are keeping the institution of marriage alive because it's just such a huge priority
Yeah.
for our community. And the reality is there's many ways to live and there's many journeys for people the way their love story unfolds. And so the way this was inspired is I actually knew this woman that had lost her husband relatively young. She had children and a family, but I would say in her 50s, she lost her husband. And I observed her, and this is kind of what I mean by drawing from personal experience. It's like I love to do that. And I think that comes from my journalism roots because all my storytelling originated from nonfiction. So I still very much approach storytelling from a journalist's lens and point of view. So I observed this woman, and she just was constantly displaced. I felt like she was constantly displaced because our culture is so couples oriented, like when you think about like going to a wedding. I think this came up in Geeta's guide, like, that awkward singles table I think I talked about. So I felt that there was an isolation to her experience, and that kind of comes up in this story, and a grief that people didn't really know how to support her or empathize with. So in this story, what came up for me was like, why isn't this woman just dating again? Like, she's in her 50s. That's not, that's definitely plenty of time to have a second chance at love. And what I've observed in kind of widows in our community is I do not see this happening. And I got curious about why. And then I got curious about what would happen if they did. And would that be scandalous? Or how would they navigate that? Would they even know how to date? Because most of these women had arranged marriages. So, and we find dating, challenging and complicated. So what would it be like for an Indian immigrant woman to stumble into dating and love? And so that's basically what it's about. And yeah, I'm very excited. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, we're very excited to see it and kind of see all of your future projects and endeavors. Thank you so much for speaking with Urban Nation today. It
Thank
was great
you.
to have you on, and we look forward to seeing all of your future projects.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for taking the
Thank
time. I'll see
you.
you soon.